The NBA trade deadline is just around the corner, and while we've only seen a handful of trades to date, this is more than likely going to be one of the more active trade deadlines in recent memory, based on all the rumors, speculation, players believed to be on the trade block, and also given the fact that there are a lot of teams who have grossly underperformed relative to their expectations, teams that are going to be in desperation mode come the trade deadline to try and turn their season around. Teams that are still looking to win now and maybe even make one last title push. But believe it or not, there was one team in particular that could ultimately change the landscape of the NBA at the deadline, forcing teams to quickly react and make adjustments as a result of their unexpected ascendance. And yes, I'm talking about the red-hot Utah Jazz, who went from a team looking like a shoo-in for the lottery to seemingly a playoff contender. Why will the Jazz, of all teams, alter the landscape of the NBA? Well, let's dive into it further in this video. Of course, as always, if you're new to the channel and you enjoyed this type of content, it would mean a great deal to me if you subscribed, and in return, I'll be providing more NBA content like this. Now, when Danny Ainge took over as the Jazz CEO of basketball operations in December 2021, knowing Ainge's history as an executive for the Boston Celtics, you knew there were likely going to be some swift changes on the Jazz roster. A big shakeup for a team that had a lot of regular season success but couldn't manage to make any noise in the playoffs. And when that happened, yet again in that season for the Jazz that had title aspirations, Ainge took action in moving on from both Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell, getting a massive haul in return for both of them in the form of multiple first-round picks and young players for the Jazz. That offseason, they had effectively entered a rebuild, stacking up draft picks and in a position to be a part of the Tank for Wembanyama sweepstakes. And while the plan in taking for Wemby didn't really work, as the Jazz seemingly started out this season on fire, where they somehow made their way to the top of the Western Conference in the first few weeks of the year, the Jazz would eventually come back down to earth and finish 12th in the West last season. And going into this season, it was assumed the Jazz would continue to build upon their young players, further develop their core, and still be in a position to acquire another lottery pick, while still maintaining all of their picks for the future from the Timberwolves and the Cleveland Cavaliers. And while the Jazz remain one of the bottom 4 teams in the West and had a hard time stringing together wins in the first couple of months of the season, the Jazz have quickly turned their season around, going from a record of 7-16 in mid-December to now 2 games above 500, having gone 15-4 in their last 19 games, winning 12 of their last 14 and winning games handily against some of the best teams in the NBA like the Sixers, Bucks, Nuggets, and the Dallas Mavericks. In their last 20 games, the Jazz have gone from being a bottom 10 team in the NBA in both offense and defense to now top 10 in both offensive rating and defensive rating. Top 5 in the league in overall pace. They become one of the better passing teams in the league despite not having a clear point guard. Chris Dunn, ever since he's been inserted in the starting lineup, has been incredible for them, and the Jazz going 14-5 since he's taken over the reins of that role. Him and Markkanen operating in the pick and roll and pick and pop have been a thing of beauty, and makes Bulls fans like myself wonder what could have been if they had just had a competent coach when they had both of those guys back when they were kicking off their rebuild. And of course, had Dunn remained healthy. But that aside, why the Jazz have been so great as of late is they play fast, maximum effort on both ends of the floor, and most importantly, they play team basketball. Everyone knows their role out there. Effort and energy by committee. They crash the glass better than any team in the NBA, despite the fact that they don't have a clear top 20 rebounder in the league. They're one of the best shot blocking teams in the NBA. More recently, they've been shooting the ball considerably well, especially from the three-point line. And for the Jazz right now, they're playing with absolute confidence that they can be any team in the NBA and compete with the title contenders. Rebuilding team or not, they don't care. They're going to go out there and look to win, and proving all their doubters wrong. Lauri Markkanen right now is playing like a top 20, top 15 player in the world. He's been absolutely phenomenal after having a breakout season last year and leading this team on their current run, locked in and dominating every facet of the game, having his most efficient season yet on offense in his career. But look, while all of this is great for the Utah Jazz, and seeing a young rebuilding team in a small market make a quick turnaround and being competitive again, trading away their best players, but for the Jazz, they weren't supposed to be this good. Not this soon. And with their rise, you now have teams like the Lakers and Warriors, 2 teams that had title aspirations this season, now outside looking in of the play-in. And with the Jazz now making headways in the standings, there is a real possibility that if the Warriors and Lakers don't make significant changes to their roster, one of them, if not both, could very well miss the play-in entirely. Forget about the playoffs, but missing the play-in. The Western Conference is just that good, and barring any unforeseen injuries, none of the teams ahead of them are just going to start stacking L's and sliding in the standings. Like, that's the thing, when you get to the halfway point in the season, you have a pretty good idea of what your team is and where they're going to finish in the standings. Yeah, you might see some movement, a couple seeds up or down here and there, but for the most part, teams that are in the top 4 in their respective conference aren't suddenly going to take a dive in the standings and fall out of the playoff territory. And so when you look at a team like the Utah Jazz now being a serious threat to the Lakers and Warriors that could push them out of the playoff running, this will inevitably lead to desperate times for the Warriors and Lakers. So much so that they will likely mortgage their future even further to ensure they'll still be able to be on their way to the playoffs and make one last push to maximize their time that they have with their superstars in LeBron James and Steph Curry. Future assets they will hand over to other teams that will reshape how the structure of the Western Conference looks. Because here's the thing, while it would probably make more sense for both the Warriors and Lakers to go on a fire sale and trade all of their most valuable assets for draft capital and pieces for the future, we all know they're not going to do that. And so instead, trading their remaining draft capital and young players who have potential but don't put them in a position to compete now is going to be their goal at the deadline. Trying to trade for ready now players that move the needle for them and getting them back into the playoff picture. Because for the Lakers and Warriors, they're not as concerned about seeding in the playoffs. They feel that they have the players like Steph and LeBron. As long as they can get into the playoffs, they can compete and make noise. You saw that last season when the Lakers, they were a play-in team finishing with the 7th seed in the Western Conference and then going to the Western Conference Finals, beating the Warriors, who were the 6th seed, I might add. And so with future assets going out from these teams looking to win now, you're shifting the future landscape with teams currently looking to rebuild and acquiring those assets. While again, teams like the Lakers and Warriors may improve slightly in the immediate term, will eventually be on a path of being lottery bound and rebuilding themselves in the near future. And what complicates this even further is that for a team like the Utah Jazz, and knowing Danny Ainge, who loves stacking draft picks, the Jazz know that while they've been great as of late, they're by no means a title contending team, nor are they going to be contending in the next year or two. And the fact that they're winning now, and because they're winning, it's going to lead to teams below them making substantial trades at the deadline. Trades that will likely make them good enough to pass the Jazz in the standings, pushing them back into lottery territory, but not bad enough that it puts them in a position for a high lottery pick. So there is a world, and it has been reported the Jazz would be open to considering this, but trading Lauri Markkanen for a big haul to a team that is looking to contend now. Now, do I think the Jazz will actually trade Markkanen? No, because we all know Ainge would want something ridiculous like 5 first-round picks for Markkanen, and teams aren't going to be willing to give that much up for him. But it also wouldn't shock me, say if a team like the Oklahoma City Thunder, who have a ton of draft picks at their disposal, a team that has fast-tracked their rebuild and actually has the ability to go for it and make a move that would propel them into being a true title contender this season. It would not shock me if the Thunder shell out a bunch of their picks they've been stashing to go after Markkanen, who would be a great fit for them on their roster. And because the Jazz are good, but not good enough to really compete for a title or a deep run in the playoffs, but they're not bad enough to continue on their path to rebuild both for this upcoming draft, but more importantly, the stacked draft class in 2025, there is a world where the Jazz could be sellers at the deadline. And moving on from Jordan Clarkson, who doesn't fit their timeline at his age, but is serviceable enough to get them value in return, maybe even look to move on from Colin Sexton and capitalize while his value is higher than what it has been in the past. And of course, like I mentioned, Markkanen, whose value is at an all-time high, a top 20 player in his prime, and is on a very team-friendly deal relative to his production and value, making under $18 million a year. That would be an opportunity for the Jazz to pile on the already mountain of draft picks they currently have, and essentially do what the Thunder have done in building through the draft and look to be one of the best teams in the NBA in the more distant future. And so while it may seem inconsequential, the Jazz going on an otherwise forgettable run in the middle of the season in January, a run that has been fun and exciting for them and their fans, a run that is out of nowhere that most teams hadn't anticipated, including the Jazz themselves, will actually lead to drastic changes that will trickle down throughout the league, both for now, meaning those teams that will look to get better for this season, and for the future, the teams that will be the benefactor at the hands of those other teams in desperation. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out as we get closer and closer to the trade deadline. Based on the Jazz rise, let me know what you guys think and how this will impact other teams and their decisions at the deadline. Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.